The wilderness can be breathtaking yet terrifying, especially when faced with its most powerful creatures, bears. Grizzly and black bear attacks are often sudden and violent, defying our expectations of these majestic animals. In this video, we'll explore a series of gripping encounters, from a hiker's near-death experience in the Alaskan backcountry to a photographer's desperate escape on Kodiak Island. Each story reveals the raw, unpredictable nature of these animals and the unspoken survival rules that could one day save your life. Join us as we dive into 6 harrowing tales of bear attacks on humans. On May 10, 2025, deep in the wilderness of a remote region in eastern Russia, a campsite became the scene of one of the most horrific bear attacks in recent history. The dense forests of this area, known for their rugged terrain and diverse wildlife, had long been home to the formidable Ussuri brown bear, a subspecies of the grizzly bear noted for its immense size and power. That year, the region had endured an exceptionally harsh winter. Heavy snowfall and prolonged freezing temperatures had severely depleted natural food sources, pushing wildlife closer to areas of human activity in search of sustenance. Local rangers had issued warnings about increased bear activity, but those warnings went unheeded by a group of 6 friends from Moscow who were seeking adventure in the wilderness. Vladislav Kuznetsov, Anastasia Petrova, Mikhail Sokolov, Nadezhda Orlova, Igor Volkov, and Tatiana Morozova had been planning the trip for months. All in their late 20s, they were avid outdoor enthusiasts who met during their time at university and had remained close despite the demands of their professional lives. This journey was meant to be a long-awaited reunion. The group arrived at their chosen campsite on the afternoon of May 9th. They set up 3 tents in a clearing surrounded by towering trees and began preparing a meal over an open fire. According to later investigations, most of the food was properly secured in bear-resistant containers, but some snacks and cooking utensils were left exposed or inadequately cleaned. The night passed without incident. Vladislav and Anastasia shared one tent, Mikhail and Nadezhda another, and Igor and Tatiana the third. None of them were aware that a large male Ussuri brown bear, estimated to weigh over 350 kilograms, had picked up the scent of food carried on the night breeze. Wildlife experts later theorized that the bear, malnourished after the brutal winter, had been drawn to the site by residual food odors. At approximately 3:40 a.m. on May 10th, the predator approached the campsite. Investigators believe the bear first examined the area where dinner had been prepared before turning its attention to the tents. What followed was reconstructed through physical evidence and the testimony of the sole survivor. The bear attacked the tent occupied by Igor Volkov and Tatiana Morozova, tearing through the fabric with ease. The noise woke the others, but in the confusion and darkness, escaping proved nearly impossible. The bear moved quickly and aggressively between the tents. Mikhail Sokolov and Nadezhda Orlova attempted to flee, but were caught just meters from their tent. Vladislav Kuznetsov pushed Anastasia Petrova out of the back of their tent and attempted to divert the bear's attention using a flashlight. His actions gave her just enough time to escape into the forest, though she sustained deep lacerations to her back and shoulders during the escape. Severely injured and in shock, Anastasia Petrova managed to navigate through the darkness, following the distant sound of a river. For nearly 7 hours, she stumbled through the wilderness, losing blood and battling hypothermia. By extraordinary fortune, she reached a ranger station shortly after daybreak, where stunned staff immediately called for an emergency medical evacuation. When authorities arrived at the campsite later that day, they discovered a scene of unimaginable devastation. All 5 of Anastasia's friends had been killed, their bodies bearing clear evidence of the bear's overwhelming strength. Tracking teams with trained dogs located the animal approximately 4 kilometers from the site. Given the severity of the attack and the bear's demonstrated predatory behavior toward humans, wildlife officials made the decision to euthanize it. A forensic examination confirmed that the bear was a 12-year-old male, severely underweight for its size. It had broken teeth and signs of arthritis, conditions that likely contributed to its weakened state and abnormal aggression toward people. The incident sent shockwaves across the country and prompted federal authorities to introduce sweeping changes to wilderness safety policies. These included mandatory bear safety training for all camping permit holders, stricter regulations on food storage, and expanded ranger patrols during the spring months when bears emerge from hibernation in search of food. Anastasia Petrova spent 3 months recovering in the hospital. After her release, she became an advocate for wildlife conservation and bear safety education. In memory of her lost companions, she established a non-profit organization dedicated to promoting safe coexistence between humans and large predators. The foundation focuses on education and improved wilderness management practices. The attack stands as a somber reminder of nature's unpredictability and power, and of the importance of vigilance and respect when entering the domain of wild animals struggling to survive in increasingly challenging conditions. In the autumn of 2017, vibrant fall foliage in a popular mountainous region of the southeastern United States drew thousands of hikers eager to witness nature's annual color display before winter set in. This ancient mountain range, spanning the border between 2 southern states, is home to some of North America's most diverse forest ecosystems and a stable population of American black bears. Among the many visitors that October was Thaddeus Blackwood, a 34-year-old software engineer from Charlotte who had recently rekindled a childhood passion for hiking. After completing several marked trails during the summer, Thaddeus felt confident enough to attempt what locals referred to as ridge chasing, a practice of seeking out ideal sunset vantage points that often required short detours off official paths. The day began without incident. Thaddeus arrived at the trailhead before dawn, his backpack stocked with energy snacks, water, a basic first aid kit, and a small canister of bear spray, a precaution he had rarely considered essential in the past. His plan was to follow a major trail for 6 miles before veering off toward a wooded ridge to reach a scenic outcropping he had marked on a topographic map. Officials later confirmed that Thaddeus had signed the trail register and outlined his intended route, although he had not disclosed plans to leave the designated path. By mid-afternoon, he had made good progress and entered a particularly dense section of forest to reach his chosen overlook before sunset. What Thaddeus could not have known was that he had stepped into a seasonal feeding area for a black bear. The bear, a female estimated to weigh around 250 pounds, had been foraging heavily on acorns and berries to prepare for winter hibernation. Biologists later concluded that the bear had likely made a temporary bedding site beneath a fallen oak near where Thaddeus intended to exit the woods. According to the account he later gave to authorities, Thaddeus was pushing through a thick stand of mountain laurel when he heard a sudden snort followed by movement in the leaves. Within moments, a bear charged from approximately 15 yards away. The impact knocked him backward down a small incline. Thaddeus described a sharp pain as the bear's teeth punctured his upper thigh. Instinctively, he began screaming and swinging his trekking poles, striking the bear across the face. This sudden resistance appeared to disorient the animal momentarily, allowing Thaddeus to roll into a narrow gap between 2 large boulders. The bear attempted to reach him but was unable to fit through the confined space. After several minutes of circling and audible huffing, the sow retreated into the brush, although Thaddeus could still hear it moving nearby for what felt like hours. Sheltered in his rocky refuge, Thaddeus Blackwood took stock of his injuries. The puncture wounds in his thigh were deep and bleeding heavily. He removed his shirt, folded it into a compress, and used his belt to hold it firmly against the wound. By then, symptoms of shock had begun to set in, and he realized his cell phone showed no signal, an all too common issue in the remote valleys of the region. As twilight descended over the mountains, the temperature dropped sharply, intensifying his physical distress. Believing he might not survive the night, Thaddeus retrieved his trail journal from his backpack and wrote what he thought could be his final message. He included a note to his mother, added the date, and recorded his coordinates from the GPS device before carefully placing the journal back into his pack. Help came from an unexpected source. Marianne Lefebvre, an experienced backcountry guide, had been leading a small group along a nearby trail when one of her clients reported hearing unusual sounds. Recognizing the noises as possible distress calls, Marianne followed wilderness protocol. She instructed her assistant to lead the group to their designated campsite while she went to investigate. She discovered Thaddeus shortly after 8 p.m., semi-conscious and in an advanced state of hypothermia. Marianne immediately activated her emergency beacon and provided wilderness first aid, using thermal blankets and heat packs to stabilize his core temperature. The area's emergency response team, already mobilized after Thaddeus failed to return to his vehicle by nightfall, arrived by helicopter 3 hours later. At a regional trauma center, surgeons operated for 5 hours to repair the damage to his thigh, which had narrowly missed a major artery. Medical staff confirmed that had the field compress not been applied when it was, Thaddeus would have likely succumbed to blood loss before rescue. Following an investigation, wildlife officials determined the bear had acted defensively when startled at close range. It was neither relocated nor tracked further, and the incident was classified as a rare and unfortunate wilderness encounter rather than a predatory attack. During his 3-month recovery, the message Thaddeus had written in his journal gained widespread attention among outdoor enthusiasts. His words were shared as a poignant reminder of how quickly adventure in the wild can turn perilous. The phrase he had written, his farewell to his mother, was later incorporated into public safety campaigns about the risks of venturing off established trails. Thaddeus returned to hiking the following year, but never alone again. He became a vocal advocate for wilderness safety, especially regarding behavior in bear country. In interviews, he often emphasized that the bear had not been at fault. It had been defending its space. The outcome, he maintained, stemmed from his own choice to leave the marked trail. As a result of the incident, park officials introduced new signage at trailheads, warning about the increased risk of off-trail hiking during the fall season, when bears are actively preparing for hibernation. These education efforts were credited with reducing similar incidents by nearly 40% in the following years. In the crisp autumn of 2013, a remote wilderness area in the American West was blanketed in golden hues as fall settled across the rugged terrain. Known for its geothermal features and abundant wildlife, this region held one of the densest grizzly bear populations in the contiguous United States. The surrounding ecosystem remained one of the few places where these apex predators had never been completely driven out, making it both a conservation stronghold and a zone of ongoing human-wildlife conflict. Baxter Thornfield and Reed McAllister had been close friends since their college days at Montana State University 2 decades earlier. Both had settled in Bozeman after graduation, Baxter working as a civil engineer, Reed as a high school science teacher. Their annual elk hunting trip had become a cherished tradition, offering a rare chance to disconnect from daily life and reconnect with each other and the wilderness they revered. That year, they secured a highly sought-after late-season elk permit for a rugged zone near the northern boundary of the protected area, where limited hunting was allowed under strict regulations. As experienced outdoorsmen, they followed all safety protocols, carrying bear spray on their belts, storing food in certified bear-resistant containers suspended from trees, and processing any harvested game away from camp and downwind. However, an unusually dry summer had severely reduced natural food availability for the region's grizzlies. Park biologists had observed increased bear activity at lower elevations as the animals ranged farther in search of nourishment before hibernation. Some bears had even begun shadowing wolf packs to scavenge their kills, a risky behavior that brought them into closer proximity with humans. Baxter and Reed arrived at their remote campsite on October 29th, setting up their tent in a clearing surrounded by lodgepole pines. They spent the day scouting for elk sign and found promising evidence of a nearby herd, That evening, they cooked a modest meal using a portable stove and discussed their hunting plans before settling into their sleeping bags shortly after sundown. According to Reed's later statement to officials, he was awakened around 4:15 a.m. when Baxter mentioned he was stepping outside to relieve himself. After pulling on his boots and jacket, Baxter exited the tent with a small headlamp. Reed dozed off briefly, only to be jolted awake roughly 10 minutes later by low, guttural growls emanating from the edge of the campsite. When Baxter failed to return after several minutes, Reed called out for him but received no reply. Growing increasingly concerned, he quickly pulled on his boots, grabbed his rifle and flashlight, and stepped out of the tent. Sweeping the area with his light, he caught sight of a massive grizzly bear approximately 30 yards away. The bear was hunched over something on the ground that, with growing dread, Reed realized was his friend's motionless body. The bear immediately reacted to the light and Reed's presence, rising to its full height, estimated later at over 7 feet, and emitting a thunderous roar. Instead of charging, the bear turned back toward Baxter and began dragging the body toward the surrounding forest. Paralyzed by fear and shock, Reed made a decision that would weigh on him for years to come. Rather than attempting to intervene, an action later affirmed by wildlife experts as likely fatal, he scrambled up a nearby pine tree with low-hanging branches. From a height of about 15 feet, he watched helplessly as the grizzly disappeared into the dark tree line, dragging Baxter's body with it. Reed remained in the tree until first light, nearly 3 hours later. Disoriented and traumatized, he descended, gathered only his essential gear, and began a desperate 5-mile hike to the nearest ranger station. Officials from the wilderness area's bear management team, accompanied by armed personnel, responded swiftly to his report. Using trained tracking dogs, the team located Baxter's partially consumed remains about half a mile from the campsite. Nearby, they discovered the carcass of a young elk that the grizzly had likely killed the previous day. Evidence suggested that the bear had been actively feeding when the hunters unknowingly set up camp within its territory. DNA samples confirmed that the bear was a known male, approximately 12 years old, previously tagged as part of an ongoing wildlife monitoring project. Following protocol for fatal attacks exhibiting predatory behavior, officials made the decision to euthanize the bear. The animal was located and removed 2 days later. Investigators concluded that Baxter had likely stumbled into the bear's feeding area in the pre-dawn darkness, unintentionally provoking a defensive attack. However, the bear's subsequent behavior, dragging the body away, was considered indicative of a rare but documented shift from defensive to predatory behavior. Reed McAllister never returned to hunting after the tragedy. In the months that followed, he established the Thornfield Wilderness Safety Foundation in memory of his friend. The foundation focuses on bear safety education and conflict prevention, supporting initiatives such as improved signage, near known feeding zones, and mandatory bear safety training for all backcountry permit holders. The incident reignited debate over hunting practices in grizzly habitats, with conservation groups highlighting the increased risk associated with the presence of blood and carcasses. In response, several jurisdictions in the region introduced new regulations requiring hunters to carry bear spray and adhere to stricter meat storage and transport protocols. 5 years later, Reed published a memoir reflecting on his friendship with Baxter and the events of that ill-fated trip. In its final chapter, he observed that in the timeless interaction between humans and apex predators, people remain guests in a wilderness shaped by forces far older and more powerful than themselves, where even modern tools offer no guarantee of safety. In the summer of 2008, the remote southwestern shores of Kodiak Island, Alaska, remained one of the last truly wild coastlines in North America. Part of the sprawling Kodiak Wildlife Refuge, established in 1941, the island was home to the largest subspecies of brown bear in the world, the Kodiak bear. These massive carnivores, sometimes exceeding 1,500 pounds, roamed the island's varied terrain of mountains, meadows, and densely forested valleys, with little human interference. Percival Percy Harrington Wells had made a name for himself as one of wildlife photography's most daring and dedicated practitioners. At 46, the British-born, Seattle-based photographer had published acclaimed photo essays in prominent magazines and renowned wildlife publications. His signature approach involved immersing himself alone in wilderness areas for weeks at a time to capture intimate moments of animal behavior that few humans had ever witnessed. Percy's latest project aimed to document the feeding patterns of Kodiak bears during the summer salmon runs, specifically the subtle differences in fishing techniques employed by bears of varying ages and sexes. After securing the necessary permits from wildlife authorities, he chartered a small float plane to drop him off at a secluded cove on the island's southwestern shore, a location known for its healthy bear population, but seldom visited due to its inaccessibility. The pilot who delivered Percy to the site later recalled warning him about the unusual number of bears he had spotted during the approach flight. Percy, however, reportedly dismissed these concerns, pointing to his 20 years of experience working around large predators and the extensive safety equipment he had with him, including motion sensor cameras designed to alert him to approaching animals. For 3 days, Percy established his base camp on a small, rocky beach at the cove's edge. He set up remote cameras along a nearby salmon stream and began collecting preliminary footage. His satellite phone communications with his editor in Seattle indicated initial success, with Percy reporting he had observed at least 7 different bears utilizing the stream and surrounding area. On the 4th day, Percy decided to venture further inland to place additional cameras at locations where bears might be resting between feeding sessions. According to the data later recovered from his GPS device, he hiked approximately 3 miles up a densely wooded valley alongside the stream. The timestamps on his camera indicated he had spent several hours setting up motion-triggered equipment in a small clearing, where bear tracks and scat suggested frequent animal activity. What Percy could not have known was that he had entered the territory of a particularly large male Kodiak bear, estimated by wildlife biologists to weigh close to 1,400 pounds. The bear had recently killed a young moose calf and dragged the carcass into a thicket near the clearing where Percy was working. Evidence suggested the bear had been away from its kill temporarily, possibly forced off by wolves or another bear, and was returning when it encountered the photographer. At approximately 4:40 p.m., Percy's body-mounted camera captured the bear, observing him from the forest edge for nearly 2 minutes before making its presence known. The footage, later recovered by search and rescue personnel, showed the moment when Percy, sensing he was being watched, turned to find himself less than 30 yards from the massive predator. Unlike many bear encounters, where the animal might make a bluff charge or display defensive behavior, this bear launched into an immediate full attack. Wildlife experts who later reviewed the footage noted that the bear's body language indicated clear predatory intent rather than defensive aggression, a crucial distinction that likely determined the outcome of the encounter. Percy attempted to deploy his bear spray, but the animal closed the distance too quickly. The camera recorded the bear striking him with a powerful swipe from its front paw, sending him crashing into a fallen log. The impact caused severe trauma to Percy's skull and left deep lacerations across his face and neck. The camera continued recording for several more seconds, capturing the bear mauling him, focusing primarily on his head and upper body, behavior indicative of a predatory attack rather than a defensive one. In what park rangers later described as an extraordinary stroke of both misfortune and fortune, Percy had positioned himself directly between the bear and its cached kill. Had it not been for Percy's decision to employ the last resort survival technique of playing dead, either intentionally or due to losing consciousness, the attack might have continued to its fatal conclusion. The footage showed the bear standing over Percy's motionless form for nearly a minute before it turned away toward its original kill site. Despite suffering catastrophic injuries, Percy regained consciousness approximately an hour later. Blood loss and trauma had sent him into shock, but he managed to activate his emergency satellite beacon before losing consciousness again. The International Emergency Response Center that received the distress signal immediately alerted Alaska wildlife troopers and the Coast Guard. A rescue helicopter located Percy's position shortly after dawn the following day. First responders found him barely alive, having survived the night despite temperatures dropping into the low 40s. Percy had suffered a fractured skull, a broken jaw, severed facial nerves, partial scalping, and deep puncture wounds to his shoulders and chest. Medical professionals later stated that his heavy camera backpack had likely protected his spine from being crushed by the bear's bite. After being airlifted to Providence Kodiak Island Medical Center and later transferred to Harborview Medical Center in Seattle, Percy underwent 11 surgeries over the course of 9 months. He lost sight in his right eye and experienced permanent nerve damage, which affected his facial expressions and fine motor control in his hands. The bear was not pursued or euthanized, as wildlife officials determined it had been behaving naturally, defending a food resource within its territory. The area where the attack occurred was temporarily closed to human activity, but it was reopened the following season with enhanced warning signage about bear activity. Against all medical expectations, Percy returned to photography 18 months after the attack, though he never again worked alone in bear country. His photo essay about the experience, titled The Predator's Gaze, won multiple international awards and became a cornerstone resource in wildlife safety education. When interviewed years later about why he had chosen to continue his career after such trauma, Percy explained that his near-death experience had given him a deeper appreciation for the true nature of wild animals, not as the anthropomorphized creatures often portrayed in the media, but as powerful beings operating according to ancient imperatives of survival. In October 2011, the Gallatin Range in Montana stood resplendent in autumn glory, its lower slopes adorned with golden aspen, while early snowfall dusted the higher elevations. Part of a vast and rugged ecosystem, this mountain range formed a critical wildlife corridor between protected wilderness areas to the north. For generations, these mountains had provided premier elk hunting opportunities, drawing sportsmen from across the country to test their skills against the challenging terrain and elusive game. Alistair Montague had been hunting these mountains since childhood. At 42, the fifth-generation Montanan had accumulated decades of backcountry experience across the northern Rockies. A skilled taxidermist by profession, Alistair approached hunting with a reverence born from intimate knowledge of animal anatomy and behavior. He preferred to hunt alone, relishing the solitude and self-reliance that solo expeditions demanded. On October 17th, Alistair set out from the trailhead before dawn, planning a 3-day hunt in a remote basin he had scouted earlier in the season. The weather forecast predicted clear skies, with nighttime temperatures dropping into the teens. Ideal conditions for tracking elk as they moved to lower elevations, seeking food and shelter. By mid-morning on the second day, Alistair's persistence had paid off. He spotted a mature bull elk approximately 250 yards upslope and executed a clean shot that struck the animal's vital organs. The elk ran approximately 80 yards before collapsing in a small meadow bordered by dense pine forest. Following proper hunting protocol, Alistair waited 30 minutes before approaching to ensure the animal had expired humanely. Upon reaching the downed elk, Alistair began the meticulous process of field dressing, removing the internal organs to cool the meat quickly and prevent spoilage. He worked efficiently, using his specialized knives to separate the animal's hide and access the body cavity. So focused was he on his task that he failed to notice the disturbed vegetation and large paw prints at the forest edge, approximately 40 yards away. According to the account Alistair later provided to wildlife officials from his hospital bed, he had just completed the field dressing process when he heard a sudden crashing in the underbrush behind him. Turning, he saw an adult female grizzly bear charging directly toward him from less than 20 yards away. Despite having his rifle propped against a nearby tree, Alistair had no time to reach it before the bear was upon him. The initial impact knocked him face first into the elk carcass. The bear's weight, estimated later at approximately 350 pounds, crushed Alistair's right shoulder and collarbone. He felt the bear's teeth close around his upper arm, the pressure intense enough to splinter the humerus bone. Out of instinct, rather than conscious decision, he rolled into a protective ball, covering his neck and head with his arms. In a fortunate twist that wildlife biologists later identified as critical to his survival, Alistair's hunting rifle, a weatherproof Remington 700 and 300 Winchester Magnum caliber, was positioned between his body and the bear during part of the attack. The sturdy wooden stock partially absorbed several bites that would otherwise have penetrated Alistair's torso. The rifle was later recovered with the stock splintered and bearing distinct tooth impressions. After what Alistair estimated was about 45 seconds of intense mauling, the bear suddenly ceased its attack. Through the haze of shock and pain, he perceived the animal standing over him, huffing and swaying. Behavior experts later interpreted as the grizzly determining whether the threat had been neutralized. After what seemed like an eternity but was likely only moments, the bear turned and disappeared into the forest, leaving Alistair bleeding heavily in the alpine meadow. Despite catastrophic injuries, including a shattered right arm, 4 broken ribs, a punctured lung, and deep lacerations to his back, side, and scalp, Alistair maintained consciousness. Drawing on decades of wilderness experience, he knew his survival depended on immediate action. Using his undamaged left hand, he retrieved the emergency medical kit from his pack and applied quick-clot gauze to the most severe wounds. He then secured his mangled right arm against his chest, using his hunting vest as an improvised sling. With extraordinary fortitude, Alistair began the agonizing journey uphill to reach higher ground where his satellite GPS emergency beacon might transmit more effectively. Each step sent waves of pain through his body, and blood loss gradually weakened him. It took nearly 3 hours to cover less than half a mile of terrain. At a small ridgeline clearing, Alistair activated his emergency beacon and collapsed against a boulder. The GPS device transmitted his coordinates to emergency services shortly after 4 p.m. Search and rescue teams mobilized immediately, but deteriorating weather conditions prevented helicopter evacuation until the following morning. Alistair endured a night of sub-freezing temperatures, fading in and out of consciousness as hypothermia compounded his injuries. At dawn, a break in the storm allowed a rescue helicopter to reach his location. First responders found him in critical condition, but still alive, a testament to his wilderness knowledge and sheer determination. At the hospital, trauma surgeons worked for 11 hours to repair the damage to Alistair's arm, chest, and internal organs. Medical staff later remarked that his exceptional physical conditioning and immediate first aid measures were crucial factors in his survival. Even so, his recovery required months of hospitalization and rehabilitation. Doctors salvaged his arm, though with permanently limited function and chronic pain. Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks officials investigated the incident and determined that the grizzly had likely been in the process of claiming the elk carcass when Alistair inadvertently positioned himself between the predator and the food source. DNA samples collected from Alistair's clothing identified the bear as a known sow with 2 yearling cubs, though the cubs were not present during the attack. Following department policy for defensive bear incidents with no history of problematic behavior, officials did not attempt to locate or remove the bear from the wild. When able to speak with investigators, Alistair insisted that he harbored no ill will toward the grizzly, acknowledging that he had entered her territory and that she had behaved according to her nature. His perspective impressed wildlife managers who invited him, once recovered, to participate in hunter education programs focusing on bear safety in grizzly country. 6 months after the attack, with his right arm supported by a complex brace, Alistair appeared before the state legislature to advocate for a bill requiring all backcountry hunters to carry bear spray. His testimony, delivered in a matter-of-fact manner that belied his harrowing experience, helped secure passage of the measure by a narrow margin. Though he never regained full use of his dominant arm, Alistair returned to hunting 2 seasons later, always with a partner, always with bear spray accessible on his hip, and always with a deeper respect for the apex predators with whom he shared the wilderness. In the autumn of 2019, the Adirondack Mountains of upstate New York displayed their legendary fall colors, drawing thousands of visitors to experience the region's spectacular natural beauty. Established as a protected Forever Wild area in 1892, the Adirondack Park encompassed 6 million acres of forests, lakes, and mountains, the largest publicly protected area in the contiguous United States. While much of the park had developed tourist infrastructure, substantial portions remained genuine wilderness, home to healthy populations of black bears that had grown increasingly habituated to human presence over decades of conservation management. Zachariah Pemberton and Valencia Orozco Pemberton had chosen the Adirondacks to celebrate their 5th wedding anniversary. The couple from Boston, he a software developer and she a pediatric nurse, had met during college volunteer work, building hiking trails in these very mountains. Returning to the region held special significance for them, and they had splurged on renting a luxury cabin near Long Lake, approximately 30 miles from the nearest sizable town. Whispering Pines Retreat sat on 3 private acres bordering state forest land, advertised online as offering authentic wilderness seclusion with modern amenities. The A-frame structure featured panoramic windows overlooking a serene pond, a spacious deck with outdoor grilling facilities, and rustic chic decor that matched the couple's aesthetic preferences perfectly. What the listing failed to mention was the property's history of wildlife encounters, specifically the increasing frequency of bear sightings in the area over the previous 2 years. The Pembertons arrived at the cabin on October 12th, delighted to find it even more charming than the photographs suggested. They spent their first day hiking nearby trails and returned exhausted but satisfied to prepare a celebratory anniversary dinner. Valencia had brought special ingredients for grilling steaks and vegetables on the deck's elaborate barbecue setup, and the couple enjoyed their meal as twilight descended over the pond. Environmental conservation officers would later determine that several critical errors occurred that evening. The Pembertons, though environmentally conscious, were urban dwellers unfamiliar with proper food management in bear country. They had cleaned the grill only superficially after cooking, leaving substantial grease and food residue on the grates and in the drip pan. Additionally, they had disposed of food scraps in an ordinary kitchen trash can inside the cabin, rather than using the bear-resistant container provided in a separate utility shed, a detail mentioned only briefly in the back pages of the cabin's information binder. According to Valencia's subsequent account to authorities, the couple had retired around 10:30 p.m. after enjoying wine by the fireplace. The bedroom was located on the cabin's second-floor loft, while the kitchen and living area occupied the open-concept main floor below. At approximately 2:15 a.m., they were awakened by what Zachariah initially assumed was a raccoon or squirrel rummaging through the kitchen. When the sounds of breaking glass and clattering metal intensified, Zachariah decided to investigate. Valencia reported that she had urged him to stay in the bedroom, but he had insisted on checking, taking only his phone as a flashlight. From the loft railing, he shone the light down into the kitchen area and found himself face to face with a medium-sized black bear that had entered through a window the couple had left partially open for fresh air. The bear, estimated by wildlife officials to weigh approximately 250 pounds, had already scattered trash across the kitchen floor and was aggressively exploring the refrigerator contents. Startled by the sudden light, the animal looked up toward Zachariah on the loft and immediately displayed signs of agitation, huffing loudly and swatting at the countertop. Zachariah backed slowly toward the bedroom door, but the bear, perhaps feeling cornered or simply following the food scent, began climbing the wooden staircase to the loft. Valencia recalled hearing Zachariah shout for her to barricade the bedroom door as he tried to divert the bear's attention. She grabbed their suitcases and pushed them against the door while searching frantically for anything that could be used as a weapon. The bear reached the top of the stairs with surprising speed. Valencia heard a heavy thud against the bedroom door, followed by Zachariah's scream of pain. The door frame splintered as the bear forced its way into the room. In the chaos that followed, the animal delivered a powerful blow to Zachariah's chest that knocked him against the wall before turning toward Valencia. In what conservation officers later described as remarkable presence of mind, Valencia remembered the bear spray they had purchased for hiking, still in her backpack from the day's excursion. She lunged for the pack, extracted the canister, and discharged a full blast of the capsaicin-based deterrent directly into the bear's face from approximately 5 feet away. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The bear recoiled, pawing frantically at its eyes and snout while emitting distressed vocalizations. It retreated blindly, tumbling partly down the staircase before regaining its balance and crashing back through the kitchen and out the broken window. Valencia found Zachariah conscious but seriously injured, with deep lacerations across his chest and a compound fracture to his left arm where the bear's claws had torn through muscle and bone. The cabin's landline had been damaged during the bear's rampage, and cell service was non-existent in the remote location. Valencia applied pressure dressings to Zachariah's wounds using clean clothing and helped him to their vehicle. The nearest hospital was 45 minutes away along dark, winding mountain roads. Valencia later recalled that Zachariah remained conscious throughout most of the drive, going into shock only as they pulled into the emergency department parking lot around 3:30 a.m. Medical personnel stabilized him before transferring him to a trauma center in Albany, where he underwent 7 hours of surgery to repair nerve and tissue damage. By remarkable coincidence, the couple was spotted driving toward the hospital by a local fisherman, Marcus Adirondack, who was heading out for early morning fishing. Noticing their erratic driving and hazard lights, he followed them to the hospital and then used his local knowledge to guide authorities back to the cabin site, where environmental conservation officers documented the scene and set traps for the bear. The animal was captured 2 days later, still in the vicinity of the cabin and attempting to access another vacation property's unsecured trash. Following state protocol for bears that have injured humans, officials euthanized and examined the animal. The necropsy revealed the bear was a healthy 4-year-old male with no signs of disease or injury that might have explained unusual aggression. Its stomach contents included numerous food items consistent with human garbage, evidence of previous successful raids on unsecured trash. The incident prompted the Essex County Board of Supervisors to implement stricter regulations for vacation rental properties in bear habitat, requiring owners to install bear-resistant trash containers and provide prominent safety information to guests. The New York Department of Environmental Conservation also initiated an expanded public education campaign about proper food storage in the Adirondack region. Zachariah Pemberton recovered after months of physical therapy, though with permanent nerve damage affecting grip strength in his left hand. The couple founded Bear Smart Adirondacks, a non-profit organization dedicated to reducing human-bear conflicts through education and improved waste management infrastructure throughout the park. Their anniversary tradition continued, though they now chose locations with fewer large carnivores, and they became meticulous about securing food and trash whenever they ventured into bear country.